So welcome everybody to the second last webinar in our series, and tonight we're really taking a look at parental engagement and really focusing on the aspects of what a school can do around parental engagement, and then looking at social-emotional learning. And they're both really, I think, crucial approaches that sometimes can be hard to focus in on in the daily busyness of the school. So if you can just all put your hand up, let me know that you can hear me loud and clear coming in from Melbourne. Fantastic, great. Thanks for putting your hands up, fantastic. And as always with all our webinars, if you have, Launceston, sorry, Launceston caught my eye, I love Launceston. If you have any questions throughout, what we do have is our fabulous Associate Director, Danielle Toon, is on the Q&A box, so you can type in questions throughout. We'll also have question time at the end as well, and I have given us enough time to go back and review some of those, and also you can ask new questions at that time. So fantastic. So just use that, and then the chat box is just for letting us know where you're from, and then I'll be asking different questions in the night, so you just put those in there. Fantastic. So I acknowledge that I am, well, we're all meeting on the traditional, we would all like to acknowledge that we're meeting on the traditional, the lands of traditional custodians. It will be different for every state and territory that you're coming in from today. Today, myself, I'd like to pay respect to the traditional custodians of the land, the elders of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation here in Melbourne, and pay my respects to elders past, present, future and emerging, which I think is one of the most exciting parts, is the emerging. So this is just a brief overview of what we'll be covering. So quite broad level, looking first at parental engagement, then at social emotional wellbeing, then looking at one of our learning impact funds, which is resilient families, and then leaving time for questions. Because what we found last week, that it was really quite useful to leave a bit of time for questions so that we can go into those in a bit of depth. And if we can't address them, what we'll also do is send those out to you, answers to those to you later on as well in the webinar email that we send out at the end of this, and we'll also have the full recording available of the webinar and the slides as well, free to download off our site. So I thought it's Wednesday, and who doesn't love a quiz on a Wednesday? So we're going to start off by doing a bit of a quiz around the current evidence base. And so the first question that you can see there is, and I'm also projecting it up on the screen as well, is the current evidence base suggests that the best way for parents to help their children learn in literacy is to read to them. True and false. So if you put your answer in, true or false, and I can see everyone's excellent. All right, 31% voted. Oh, I like watching the numbers go up in real time. And then the second question that I'm asking as well, which you can answer straight away, is approaches in social emotional wellbeing can positively impact students' learning. So when I'm saying the best way for parents to help their children in literacy is to read to them. So it's a bit of a trick question I've thrown in there first off. What the evidence base suggests that, and it is dependent on the age of the students, but for older students who can actually read, the best way for parents to engage with those age children is for them to read to them. Okay, so for children to be reading to their parents is the best way that children will do further in literacy. We do need to back our parents with some basic understanding around literacy in order for that to occur, but even just the act of the student, the child reading out loud to their parents is going to be more effective than the parent just reading. But we also do know that it is important to have a home filled with books. We know that there's a significant impact of a home being filled with over 200 books on children's learning outcomes, and also to see the parents actively engage themselves in reading is important as well. But we know that for effective practice, the best way is for that child to read when they're of an age that can read. So that was a surprise to me when I read the literature. So I'm not surprised that it's a surprise to a lot of you here as well tonight, with 11% calling that out as false. Now in the next one, I think we've got firm believers in the fact that if we help our students gain those crucial skills in social emotional well-being and learning, they can actually influence their learning outcomes. That is indeed true, and we've got 100% of you think that that is true. So you can see that now. So that's the results that I'm sharing with you now. Great. So let's move on to what we're really here to talk about here today, which is really using evidence. We'll be looking at some evidence today from the Teaching and Learning Toolkit. And so what I want you to bear in mind there, and what we'll be looking at today in detail, is around parent engagement and social emotional learning, is that there's a lot of variation in those effect sizes. And we can see this here in this other graph, which is showing us different types of studies. So this is studies in medicine. So this is showing us that sometimes substances will show in one study that they're protective against cancer, but yet in another study it will show us that they cause cancer. It's pretty good news for a Wednesday night, or those of you from Melbourne. I'm not sure how your Melbourne Cup went yesterday, the news on wine, but we're not looking at I'll warn you, we're not looking at the cardiovascular implications. Beef and butter aren't great news stories, but yet I still had some butter today with my lunch, and I know this graph. And I guess that's the thing, is that we can know the evidence, but what's really important is to put it into action, and that can be the really tricky bit. So if we jump to looking at parental engagement, what we can see here with the headline figures, and I'll walk you through what they mean on the website in a second, but we're looking at +3 months worth of learning impact. So that's a significant impact for the way we work with parents and in the way those parents work with their children. There's a relatively high evidence security with 3 padlocks. The highest that we have in the toolkit is 5 padlocks, and that's for phonics. And the average cost we know is relatively high compared to other approaches. I've also written there what are the links that we can make to the Australian Professional Standards for teachers with parental engagement, because we've actually mapped the whole of the toolkit to that in working with AITSL. So now I'm going to get you to do a little bit more work, and I'm going to ask you to enter into the chat box, what are your conceptions of parental engagement currently? So I'll let you put that into the chat box, and I'll read out some of what you're saying to us now. Now, don't be afraid. It's fine to just, what do you think parental engagement, even what do you think that the 2 words sound like, parental engagement? And remember to write it to all panelists and attendees. Great. Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you for being the first person. It's always tricky. Great. Inclusion such as home reading, help in the classroom, emails, phone calls, afternoon chats, and so on. Exactly. It's quite broad what we consider to be parental engagement. And I'll be going through the different categories, and you've touched on quite a few of those categories that Epstein defined for us that I quite like as a framework. Parents taking an active role. Yep. including parents in the conversation. That's a lovely turn of phrase, because that's really saying that parents are partners in learning. And I know that there's a paper I won't be covering today, but some work that Janet Clinton did around that in New Zealand, which is quite nice as well, which we can send as part of the follow-up. Active role. Yeah, exactly. It is more looking at that active role when we're focusing in on engagement. Interested, actively involved, fantastic. Yeah, that's an excellent point. So making sure that this conversation with parents is occurring, and breaking down any power differentials that may have existed in the past, and making sure that parents really feel like a partner in the learning of their child. I know I've had some fantastic experiences with my son's teachers where teachers have just been excellent at really engaging us in his learning progress, and we've been able to make some significant changes at home through conversation with them that have really helped his learning. So that's a great point. Yeah, fantastic. So really parents engaging conversations with their children about their learning. Very important that parents do care, and we won't be so much touching in on that tonight, but it is still an important part, because we know that aspirations of parents can be really important in influencing students' learning outcomes. Yep. Also make it broad enough that it includes the communication, is also touching on the well-being aspects of that child. Really important, can be crucial, can be life-saving conversations that parents have with parents. Yeah, getting parents on board, acknowledging their importance in learning and decision making. And I've seen, that's a really good point. Oh, co-educators, lovely. Two-way communication and active inclusion. Fantastic. Guys, this is beautiful. Absolutely beautiful responses. And what I love is you've really done a big depth and breadth, and we'll be covering off some of that, looking at Epstein's categories, and then we'll jump on the site and have a look at the way that it's defined within the toolkit as well. I think that getting on board can be crucial, especially can be, and we won't be covering this tonight, but in strategic decision making. So I've seen some schools do some superb community engagement around the responses that they've had in student surveys and parent surveys, and then bringing in the parental community and actually to make the decisions together in order to improve the responses there. So really good, beautiful points. All right, so definition within the toolkit is really around, it's quite broad as well. So it involves, so developing parental skills in literacy or IT, general approaches to encourage parents to support their children with example reading or homework, and we touched off on those. The involvement of parents in their children's learning activities and more intensive programs for families in crisis is what we're really talking about here within the toolkit. So around the toolkit, we know that it's a starting point for you to engage with research and to help really with decision making across Australian schools. We're reporting on 3 key things, and that's the average month's worth of learning progress, the cost to implement, and the security of the evidence. So the costs, this is our definition in the toolkit around the costs. And then we have our evidence security. So I like to think of it as a depth and breadth of evidence that sits underneath each one of those approaches, and they do vary considerably from approach to approach. And we know that it's moderate for parental engagement. Difficult to do studies in this area, but very important as well. And here's our translation from the average month's worth of learning progress into our from effect size into average months worth of learning progress. So if we have a look now, these are just the broad categories that Epstein, who's a bit of a leader in this field, defined around parental engagement. And I know that I find these useful in framing the way we think about parental engagement. So looking at parenting, so setting homes to support students, schools to better understand families, communicating. We'll be looking at one particular study that's come out of the EF around communicating. We know that communicating can be hard to measure and can be hard to see a direct effect on students' learning, which is probably not surprising, but they have measured one in this one study that we'll be going through. Volunteering. We know that learning at home is really where the largest evidence-based lies and where we see the largest number of studies, and we'll be going through a few of those in detail. Another area is involving schools in decision making. There's not a lot of large randomised controlled trials on this, but as I was saying, it's incredibly important in order for maintaining that. Also with that power differential, that it doesn't so much exist, because they know that they are equal partners and they are involved in the day-to-day decisions of the school. And it can be engaged very, I've seen some beautiful, skillful engagement up in the NT in some schools that I visited, where, yeah, it's really valued, and not just in a piecemeal matter, but in a real strategic way. Parents are engaged in that decision-making process and collaborating with the community as well. So this is the spread of the study. So we can see that's the initial, we're looking at effect sizes down the bottom. That's all the names of the studies there, and that's our weighted mean effect size. Okay, so it's weighted according to number of students in the study. And you can see there are a few outliers, and to me, I'm really interested in, okay, well, what do we know is really effective in engaging parents? You can also see a lot of studies from genes there as well. What's those? And you can see they're quite varied as well. They're looking at different involvement. So the 2015 was just looking at father involvement, while the other ones were looking at urban schools, the 2007 and the 2012. And then the 2005 was just looking at primary schools. So it's interesting to see just even the one author, if they take different groups and perform different meta-analyses, they're coming out with different effect sizes. So let's have a bit of a look into some of the studies that we can see there that have shown a significant impact. So, for example, here, what we find, so a large impact, and that's the largest study that's included within this meta-analysis within the toolkit, is that we see that parents who tutored their children using specific literacy activities produce larger effects than when parents just listen to their children read books, or if the parents just read books to those children as well. Okay, so we know that reading books can be effective, but even more effective is if we teach the parents the most specific literacy skills possible. Also, we know that joint book reading, so that showed an effect size of +7 months, an effect size of 0.59, which is important in that emergent literacy and reading achievement area. Also, we can see in another effective study is an impact of 5 months, or an effect size of 0.43. And this was active engagement of a parent with their child. This is within the primary school setting, in an activity which really focuses in on enhancing academic achievement. Okay, so it's really where we see the largest impact, is really where we are training parents to be teachers at home, really, and use the most effective strategies that we know. All right, so that is a summary of some of the evidence base on our website. Now, what was really, I think, really interesting, so our partner organisation, the Education Endowment Foundation, they're quite a large organisation now. 1 in 3 schools have been involved in a trial to determine specifically how something works in the UK based on their involvement with the Education Endowment Foundation. What they've done is they've had about 20 different randomised controlled trials looking at different parental engagement programs. And disappointingly, they haven't found any positive impact apart from this one. What I like about this one is that the evidence base in primary is much bigger than the evidence base in secondary, as you just saw with the results that I just talked you through. So it's exciting to talk about something that did work in secondary. It's a surprising outcome. I know Professor Jonathan Sharples, when he talks about this, he says, we were like, out of all the studies that we were doing on parental engagement, we really didn't think that a text was going to be that helpful. But in the secondary setting, and what they did, so they were sent an average of 30 texts over a school year, roughly about 1 per week, with content ranging from up and coming tests and warnings about missed homework, or conversational prompts about what the child has learned for that day. And being a busy parent, I myself could really see the value in this, but still surprising that it had a 1 month increase in maths achievement, which is really quite substantial for a text at home, which can be automated. They were running a web-based platform for that. And they also saw absenteeism reduced as well. And I think it was that this is in communicating constantly with parents, they were able to see an impact. So I think that's a really interesting one. So we've got the link down there if you want to read more about that. So these are just the key findings in the what should I consider section in our toolkit, which provide you with the most concrete information really in trying to turn the evidence into practice in your setting. So as I was saying, it's often easier to achieve with parents of very young children, hard to how are you going to maintain that with older children. What's your flexibility around your approach for parental engagement to fit around parental schedules? That can be an important one really to consider, and I think also to ensure that that it's equitable for both men and women in engagement, and shows a similar level of flexibility for men and women, I think, in their access to the school. How we make your school welcoming, and this is really turning back to that power question that I think was right at the start when you were talking about how you define parental engagement, which is don't assume that everyone's experience of schooling has been positive. I was fortunate to work on a year-long project on parental engagement up in Queensland, looking at the impact of the Songaroon program on engaging parents as partners in the learning of students around literacy, and we saw quite large impact of that. But what I got from having yarns with parents, having yarns with staff as well, is that some people have had incredibly negative, as we know, interactions with schooling. And we need to be mindful of those and need to really take that into consideration. Heard of a school the other day, and they made a special building for parents that wasn't so much, it was in a different area of the school, a bit disassociated from all the formal buildings, to make the parental engagement a bit smoother. And I know in that project as well, they were meeting with parents off-site in different places for craft circles and things like that, and then bringing in actually the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander parents as cultural resources in order for them to share what they had actually their experiences, and then those inform the literacy project. So there are thoughtful ways to make sure that and really to consider that. And then what's that practical advice and guidance that you can give to parents? And we went through some of the practical advice and guidance last week when we were looking at literacy. So we know that there are key elements that we can teach our parents so that they can better work with our students around literacy. Great, so that is around the parental engagement. And now if we jump to social-emotional learning, so this is plus 4 months worth of learning impact, and this is looking at impact on learning outcomes, not social-emotional well-being outcomes, high evidence security, and a similar cost to parental engagement, but of course it's going to be dependent on the approach that is taken. So what we'll do now is similar to what we did before. So it's how do you define social-emotional learning? And if you can enter that into the chat box, and we'll use that as a springboard for our conversations, because it's really what it helps me is to contextualize these slides in where you're coming from. And we always appreciate the first person because it always feels a little bit bold to be the first person. And feel free also to put any questions that you have throughout the session into the chat box. So, do we have anyone? What do you think are the core concepts involved in social-emotional? There we go. There we go. No wrong answers. Exactly. And that's what we're trying to model here today. A safe and supportive environment where collaboration is encouraged. Oh, lovely. So really focusing in on resilience. So the skills and strategies to be resilient. And we know that the way we define resilience is just the ability to overcome hardships. And we can actually measure social-emotional well-being. I know there's a lovely tool from ACER that you can get to longitudinally measure that over time. I've used it myself. So we can do an intervention and then see if it increases over time. Yep, skills such as managing difficult feelings, problem solving, social skills. Yep, great. Oh, that's a lovely definition there. Yeah, evidence-based teaching skills and competencies needed to manage themselves in their social environment. That's fantastic, thank you. And thank you all for your generosity and willingness to be public in this space. That's fantastic. Yeah, social and cultural environment, great point. Yep. Beautiful life skills, engaging positively with others. Fantastic, thank you. Thank you all. So this is really focusing in on the social emotional dimensions, as the name suggests, rather than the academic and the cognitive aspects. We know that these are important for influencing students' learning outcomes and incredibly important also for life in order to effectively get along with other people. So we know that there are, within the definition, within the toolkit, what we say there are 3 broad categories of the different types of ways we can approach social-emotional learning within the classroom. So there can be universal programs that usually occur within the classroom, more specialised programs that are targeted with students with particular social-emotional problems or areas of need. And then we've got school level approaches to develop a positive school ethos. So those are the different ways that we perceive SEL within the Teaching and Learning Toolkit. So if we have a look at the meta-analysis of SEL, Here they are there with a mean weighted effect size of 0.28. So again, like we did before, we're going to have a look at some of the ones that meta-analyses that have shown a higher effect size. Just have a look and see what's happening in those. You can see there, which is quite interesting, we've got 2 from Washington State Institute for Public Policy. I was looking at those and I thought they're both published within the same year, but both show such discrete and different effect sizes. So one of them is actually looking at promoting alternative thinking strategies, that program. The other one is the positive action curriculum, so the more effective one, and we'll have a look at the positive action curriculum. So that's the spread that we're dealing with in social-emotional learning. So what they found here is probably, it's not surprising, it's really applicable, I can see here across everything, which is a sequence step-by-step training approach. So making sure that it's a school-wide focus and involves active forms of learning, and like any good professional learning really has a sufficient focus in on time and skill development and has explicit learning goals throughout. So this had a 3 months impact on academic outcomes. So 0.72 was the 0.27 was the effect size, and then a 7 months impact on cell skills, which are sometimes co-reported on. Specifically, the toolkit looks at academic outcomes, but I've just included that in because when I had a look at the thing, I think it's important that whenever we're measuring anything, we've also got to see that it's having an influence on what we're trying to change, and this is student social-emotional learning. So looking at the other study, we can see a 6 months worth of learning impact, or a 0.46 effect size. So we're seeing an increase in social skills and a decrease in antisocial behaviour were most often reported within this particular study. So we're looking at, and they had 7 major categories of outcomes, which included social skills, which was coming up before when you were defining CEL, antisocial behaviour, substance abuse, self-image, academic achievement, mental health, and pro-social behaviour were the key indicators that they were looking at there in that study. Now, if we have a look at that Washington State Institute for Public Policy, the one that we did see a positive impact from, which was the 0.31 effect size, so the plus 4 months worth of impact on academic outcomes. This is a school-wide positive program, and it has actually really quite a detailed backbone to it that exists of over 140 short lessons, which I thought was quite a lot of lessons, and just shows the type of approach that you can take to get that type of impact. And that's from kindergarten through to grade 6. But then in grade 7 and 8, it had an additional 82 lessons. So really quite an involved social-emotional learning pathway here. So really focused in on school climate components. And they were really to focus in on, to reinforce what was occurring in those curriculum components, which we saw are quite heavy and well developed. So in looking at the findings from one of the meta-analysis, what is the key way that CEL is acting to increase our students' learning outcomes? Well, they found that students had increased in their self-awareness and increased in their confidence. And when they did that, they were more able to try harder and persist in the face of challenges, which we know is the definition for resilience. They also found that students who set high academic goals had self-discipline, motivated themselves more, managed their stress better, and organised their approach to learn more and get better grades as well. So what they're thinking is that it actually affects the central executive cognitive functions, such as inhibitory control. And in controlling inhibitory control and resulting planning, they're exerting a larger effect on their cognitive regulation, and thus they're more successful within their studies. So that's an interesting paper if you want to delve into more depth around exactly how is SEL influencing students' learning outcomes. I enjoyed that one. But I'm a bit of a fan of SEL, to say the truth, because I think, well, probably what really, I'll give a little anecdote because I can't resist. What really affected me was in talking to students when I was administering the SocialEmotional Wellbeing tool in southwestern Sydney. So in pockets of relative disadvantage, and seeing the students' responses to the questions themselves. And in finding out, and in a personal example of this, not a personal example, an example of when I was administering this tool, there was a question within there and it said, I feel safe. And the student said to me, oh, is that for school or for home? And I said, no, this is about school. And he said, oh, okay, great. And I could just tell by that response that school was the one place where he felt safe. And I just thought of the amazing ability of schools to really foster places of high social-emotional learning and thus safety. And that may be the only experience of, unfortunately for some students, of safety that occurs when they're young, and that can be a wonderful, positive thing for those children, for all children. But I think that, you know, if we're not safe and we don't know how to interact with others well, you know, the learning will be stifled. So I learned early on in my researching career, I guess, the importance of social-emotional well-being, and the fact that we can measure it and look at it longitudinally over time, and that programs can influence it quite substantially. So it's really about purposefully teaching it, explicitly linking it to direct learning in schools, and giving the students the opportunity to apply those skills that they learn. So teachers and school staff effectively support these approaches with appropriate professional development. It's also modelling, of course, which occurs in every classroom, those skills. And how you're going to, as leaders, if we I'll do a quick check. Do we have any leaders in the group? Everyone type down if you're a teacher or a leader or at the system level for me. And then really using sensitive and targeted intervention where those are more at risk or maybe more vulnerable. Awesome classroom teachers, love you. I'm still a classroom teacher. Yeah, great system teacher. Okay, fantastic. Thank you. So we know that it's not impacted consistently on. Fantastic to have so many teachers in the room. Thank you for giving up your time at night to learn more about this. This is really impressive. And I know different time zones too, because I keep saying it's 6, but it's actually 7 o'clock if in most other places we just do this weird daylight saving thing. I'm getting off point. Yeah, the impact on the social-emotional aspects of learning is not found consistently. So important, as with everything that we've always emphasised. Oh, so many teachers, awesome, that you need to evaluate if that's actually having a positive approach and impact on your students' learning within your classroom. And you'll be able to do that. Awesome, coordinator too. Good, thank you. All right, fantastic. Now what we'll do, we're just going to have a look at more broadly the work of evidence for learning, and then have a look at resilient families, which is, so you can see up there now, you can see we work in 3 broad ways, which is building evidence, encouraging and sharing knowledge, and then encouraging the use of evidence. So what we're doing tonight is encouraging use. We've also been talking about the toolkits, and I can see that there's someone from ACER on the line as well. So we've partnered with them in making a tailored toolkit in mapping to the National School Improvement Tool, and we've mapped it to states and territories all across Australia. Now we've got some people from Melbourne, so we've mapped it to the FISO, the Framework for Improving Students' Outcomes. In Victoria, the National School Improvement Tool is applicable to the states of WA and for Queensland, because I know that you use that, and Tasmania as well, who we have, I know, definitely on the line. And then we're also building evidence, and this is the area that is headed up by Dr. Pauline Ho, who will be running a webinar next week on the results from Thinking Maths. So this is where we pair an independent approach with the program of promise. What we'll do now, I'll take you through, and we'll jump on the site and just have a little look at our progress with resilient families. So they're the 4 trials that we're running, and another collaboration with ACER is the Thinking Maths results that have just been released, and you can access those from the site. But tonight we're really focusing in on social emotional wellbeing, so I thought resilient families was pertinent for this. First, we'll just start off having a look at a piece that came out in the newspaper, and also we published it on our site as well. So just giving a brief overview of the program. So it was developed from Deakin University, partnership between Vic Health and Evidence for Learning, and Western Sydney University is the evaluator. And we're looking at 14 schools. So if we just jump on to our website. Okay, and so you should be able to see website in front of you. Put up your hand if you can see the website. So if we click on the Learning Impact Fund, awesome, great. Learning Impact Fund, and then if we jump on our projects, that's the one I just mentioned before. So if you want to read the results, they're right there. But here is Resilient Families, and this is just a summary of where we're at the moment with each of our different trials. So this is really focused in on year level, students in year level 8. At the moment we have 14 schools and approximately 700 students involved. As I said, it was developed out with Deakin University. And so what we do on this site here, we provide an overview, why we're funding it, what's the evidence for date, how we're evaluating it, and when are we going to report it. And then we also have the evaluation protocol, because what we decide with our research partners right at the start is how they are going to analyse the data so that we have a consistent approach. So why are we funding it? It's had a good track record to date, but we're funding it in order to find out more. So they followed them for 3 years in the past. So they had 14 intervention, 14 control schools, and they showed increased school connectedness and reduced binge drinking by 25%. So that's quite substantial. So that's the way we're evaluating it. And early 2020, this just lets you know the organisations that are involved. So we're working with Western Sydney University, and they're our evaluators in that project there. So that is always updated, and probably the best place to go to is just there, and that will give you just a quick glance at how each project is progressing in that is always updated. So you can always jump on there and see that. Great. So now we're back on the slides, and that really takes us to the end and gives us a lot of time for questions, and also a lot of time to have an early mark as well if we're keen, because you've all been teaching all day, I'm assuming, and coordinating, and at uni all day. And so we're perfectly fine for an early mark as well, but I like to give a bit of time for questions. So if there's any questions anyone has, you can either put them into the chat box or into the Q&A. And it's all right if we don't. While you're thinking of any questions, what I'll do, I'll just jump forward and let you know ways to connect with us after this webinar. So you can join our evidence-informed. Yeah, great. Okay, good question. Join our evidence-informed educator network, subscribe to our newsletter for updates as well. And then we're on Twitter. I'm on Twitter as well, so feel free to connect with me there, and Facebook as well, and comments and feedback to me. But we'll also send around a group email after this webinar with any follow-up information that we've specified. What we have done around specific skills for teaching at home, which I'll jump onto our website, and bearing in mind, let's jump onto our website and I'll take you through that. So, all right, you should be able to see the website now. Everyone can see the website? Yeah, hands up for seeing the website. Can everyone see the website? Yep, great. Sorry, your hands are up. Beautiful. Good. So if I jump on our website and I go to Toolkit, and I'm just, and I'm having, just having a bit of a mental, is that? No, that is not it. I'm just having a little, this is good for you to learn about navigation. I was thinking about this before we came on. Homepage, all right. Homepage. Here we go. Learning Impact Fund, Australasian Research Summaries. Resources for parents. Excellent. Thanks, Danielle. So resources for parents, this is what we developed up and has probably been our most practical and work to date. And it also draws on resources from different states and territories across Australia as well. So we contacted the departments in every state and territory and asked them for the most practical resources around parental engagement. And what we did, we categorised these into different categories that parents can work in. So creating confident learners, thinking about thinking, practice makes perfect, and meaningful conversations. And you can read the evidence behind each one of those there. But I think what we're looking for is resources by our state and territory. So what state and territory was the question coming from? Vic, awesome. Hopefully I can be as specific as. So you can look at what is my child learning, parental involvement, 1,000 books for forced school. Yeah, so I think some of these will give you some good ideas in regards to, and are we thinking about, are these primary aged children? I'm asking a lot of questions. Yes, primary aged children. Here are some, which are the 5 from 5, which will give you quite specific ones around literacy. So that's an example. And I can put that into the chat box so you've got it. Yeah, pleasure. Really, really happy to help so specifically. Great, great. So that's an example of the types of resources that we have around parental engagement. This was work that we did in conjunction with News Corp, and we produced spreads that had parental engagement activities, but then we reached out to every state and territory for them to give us the best links. So you can look up according to your state and territory, and I know we've got a lot of different state and territories on the line tonight, so that will give you what your departments have endorsed and thought was a good idea, and then more broadly as well, working across different states and sectors. So absolute pleasure. So we've still got time for other questions if anyone has any other questions. And that gives a lot of, I can have a, so underneath that, then we've mapped the teaching and learning toolkit approaches that are relevant to each one of those broad categories that we've determined. Around the practice makes perfect, that would give you your more specific ones around phonics, reading comprehension strategies, and also oral language interventions. Oh, what tool did I use to measure social-emotional learning? Yeah, I can jump on the site for that as well. And this was just for, so I've done several research projects, and I've always used this one here, which I don't receive any financial benefit. What they've done, what I like about this, they've designed it and they've used it in over 10,000 students across Australia. So they've actually got meaningful results that you can compare your students to other students of the same age group. And then also you can use it in the primary and the secondary setting. What I did, I used the secondary one for grades 5 and 6 primary, and I find that that worked quite well. So I'll put that in the chat box as well. And then you can make quite nice graphs about where the longitudinal, like how your students move over time with the social-emotional wellbeing. And they also have individual constructs around resilience and other areas, so you can end up with some quite nice, I get a bit excited around talking about this because I've made some great graphs about it. Yeah, so you can end up with some nice benchmark data. So this is the one that, yeah, I've used with, I did that in southwestern Sydney with quite a few schools. It was 4 schools, so over 400 students. And then also again in looking at impact of, one was for the Song Room and one was for Bell Shakespeare, in looking at the impact of those programs. Yeah, great. And now was the, just checking if that's a question there, as developing parents as leaders. Was that looking for resources or papers specifically around that? Just checking if that's a question. Yep, great. Yeah, look, I'm happy to share, we'll share a link to a paper that I did around, which was using parents as leaders in literacy in the school setting, and also parents as leaders in the arts, and using parental stories as engagement within the primary. We'll send through a link to that, that paper. It is behind a paywall, but I can provide you with the summary, like we can write out some of the summary from it, because it's an area of great. It was an amazing project. It was a real privilege to work for a year with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples with that, and it did have a positive impact, which for a parental engagement project is fantastic. So yeah, happy. We'll send that through as a link. And the key thing there was really, well, I think is obvious, but it was respecting and valuing the different voices, and the literacy project was based around students actually producing their own stories of their own cultural heritage. And that school particular program had the largest impact, because it really embedded the cultural resources of the parents into the program. It was absolutely beautiful. Yes, definitely that link will include in a follow-up email to that paper. Pleasure. All right, good guys, we got 4 minutes. So unless there's if there's any other questions, here we go. Yes, so what I can do, I can point you to respectful relationships. I think that is directly a link off our, if I remember correctly, just have a look right now on cell, and then respectful relationships. So that's a link. This is a link to Victorian respectful relationships. Okay. No, I don't. And so I'd be happy to receive any information around that if you have any more. That's a good question. Yeah, I think it's an incredibly important area to focus in on. And if we can access and change attitudes towards that early on, we can make a big impact. So great question there. So what we can do, we can see if we can find information on that and include it in our follow-up email as well. Great question. Well, thank you all for your wonderful and thoughtful engagement tonight. It's just been a real pleasure to spend the night with you remotely, and yeah, absolute pleasure. And any comments and feedback personally about this, please let me know. You can reach out to me directly, and we will follow up with a general email as well. Yes, and great point there. There's a student wellbeing framework as well, and we'll send around the link to that as well. But as an ending note, I guess I just want to say thanks to all the teachers tonight for being online. I know how hard you work. I have people that are teachers that work daily and are intimately involved in my life, and keep up the excellent work that you do in schools. And I hope that we're being useful in really pointing you to some relevant resources to help you in that crucial, absolutely crucial work that you do every day in changing students' lives, because I know that you do it. All right, take care everyone, and